Good morning, and thank you for joining me on the path to liberty. This is the Fast Friday edition of the show for March 19th, 2021. And on this episode, I want to share with you my view that the American Revolution was really much more about resisting unlimited centralized power than just merely taxation without representation. In fact, many of the old revolutionaries looked at taxation without representation as just an outgrowth of unlimited power. Now, to make the case, I'm going to talk today about one of the least known acts of Parliament in the run-up to the War for Independence. That's the Declaratory Act, which was put into effect at the exact same time that the Stamp Act was repealed on March 18th, 1766. But first of all, before getting to that, my name is Michael Bolden. We broadcast live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific Time from here in my home office and studio in downtown Los Angeles for the 10th Amendment Center. Our show homepage is 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty. It's all spelled out, and that's where you're going to find everything you need to follow this program. All the archives, individual episodes. I include a bunch of reference links so you can read and learn more on your own time. You can find all the platforms, the live streaming video ones, the archive only, mainstream, alternative, even audio only podcast edition. And I want to thank everyone who have been leaving reviews and smashing likes and comments. All that stuff helps us spread the word. I can't thank you enough. And you can even find our membership program where you can put your financial faith behind our work for as little as $2 a month. Again, that show homepage is 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. And I couldn't be more grateful for you spending some of your time with me today. Thank you so much for being here. Whether it's your first episode or you've been here for every single one since day one, I can't thank you enough. But since it's Fast Friday, I promise to not take up too much of your time. Let's see if I can get this info out to you in the next 10 to 15 minutes. I want to first start out with an article we published yesterday by Dave Benner. And he starts it out like this. Today in history, on March 18th, 1766, British Parliament repealed the Stamp Act after months of protest from the colonies and British merchants. And you know as well as I do, and Dave does as well because he's written about this, that Parliament didn't just repeal this out of their own good graces because they decided, whoa, we really screwed up here. They repealed it because it was inexpedient. It wasn't good strategy. They recognized they were facing such stiff resistance. In fact, Murray Rothbard's great history set, multi-volume history, Conceived in Liberty, referred to this as the people's nullification of the Stamp Act. And I want to just mention that I did an episode of the same name back in December. I will link to that in the show notes. Please check it out when you're able to. But going back to Dave, he says on that same day, March 18th, 1766, royal assent was also given to the Declaratory Act. In fact, I think it was actually in the same piece of legislation, was a line item in there, a pronouncement that Parliament's authority in North America was supreme and binding upon the colonies. Dave goes on, he says, it declared that Parliament had the authority, quote, to make laws and statutes of sufficient force and validity to bind the colonies and people of America in all cases whatsoever. Now, I know if you're listening to this show on a regular basis, you've heard me use that phrase, in all cases whatsoever. Let's look into it a little further. Mercy Otis Warren, in her great History of the Rise, Progress, and Termination of the American Revolution, talks about this experience. She says, finally, in order to quiet the public mind, the execution of the Stamp Act was pronounced inexpedient. That was her language. The Stamp Act was inexpedient, not like they shouldn't have done it in the first place, by a majority of the House of Commons. And a bill passed for its repeal on March 18th, 1766. But okay, because this was right. A clause was inserted. They just added a line item to it into the repeal. A clause was inserted therein, holding up a parliamentary right to make laws binding on the colonies in all cases whatsoever. And a kind of condition was tacked to the repeal that compensation should be made to all who had suffered, either in person or property, by the late riotous proceedings. So this was really like, the patriots were very happy about the repeal. They had done a lot of resistance over the previous year, a lot of activism, a lot of coordination. And so they were very happy. And because of that celebration, they weren't really paying close attention to the Declaratory Act. They weren't seeing it as the great threat that it turned out to be. John Adams, from what I'm aware of, in his diary a month later, April of 1766, he may have been the first one to be talking about this. And it was really just privately musing about it, wondering what's going to come out of this next. Oh, I noticed this in there. And he says, I'm solicitous to know whether they will lay a tax in consequence of that resolution, or what kind of a law they will make. I'm wondering what's going to happen from this Declaratory Act, this all cases whatsoever, wrote John Adams, April 26th, 1766. We know they did a lot of stuff. There was the Townsend Acts, along with the New York Restraining Act, the Tea Act, the Coercive or the Intolerable Act. So there's a lot of stuff that came after that. And I think over time, the patriots recognized that this all cases whatsoever was really the root cause of the problem. And Dave Benner sums it up like this, or he puts it this way. In the American Crisis, this is Thomas Paine writing in December of 1776, when things weren't going really too well for the patriot cause at that point. And he was urging people to go on, saying like, look, this may be difficult, but we're running into a real problem. And Dave says he condemned the Declaratory Act and considered its underlying idea to be the root of the conflict with Britain. Paine put it this way: Britain, with an army to enforce her tyranny, has declared that she has a right not only to tax, but to bind us in all cases whatsoever. Again, Thomas Paine himself, in December of 1776, recognized that the power to tax really was just an outgrowth of this all cases whatsoever mentality of the Parliament. And he said, if being bound in that manner is not slavery, then there is not such a thing as slavery upon earth. He was basically making the case that even if they came to the table and backed down on one thing or another, as long as they have this mentality, this on the books, this all cases whatsoever, we have to do, it's liberty or death at that point. Going further, he wasn't alone, of course. John Hancock, in his Boston Massacre oration, March of 1774, commemorating that horrible event, he put it this way: they have declared that they have ever had, and of right ought ever to have, full power to make laws of sufficient validity to bind the colonies in all cases whatsoever. All cases whatever, he put it that way. They have exercised, Hancock said, this pretended right by imposing a tax upon us without our consent. So the taxation without representation, the internal taxation, was really just an outgrowth of the mentality of the British that they had control over the people of the colonies in all situations, all cases, whatever, for all time. I was reading through this great book over at Liberty Fund, online library, oll.libertyfund.org, called Political Sermons of the American Founding Era. And I found a number of references to this as well in speeches from the pulpit. Here, for example, in 1769, John Joachim Zubley said, "The words 'in all cases whatsoever' are so exceeding extensive that, in process of time, even hewing of wood and drawing of water might be argued to be included in them." Or here, John Witherspoon in 1776. He says, "I called this claim unjust of making laws to bind us in all cases whatsoever, because they are separated from us, independent of us, and have an interest in opposing us." Then this is the kicker from Witherspoon. "This is the true and proper hinge of the controversy between Great Britain and America." Very similar to what Paine was saying. Like, look, it doesn't matter what else happens, because as long as they claim the power to bind us in all cases whatsoever, we can never be free. We are, in essence, in a state of slavery. And this was even the first sentence in 1774. It was in the first sentence of the Declaration and Resolves of the First Continental Congress, October 14, 1774. They mention that they've claimed this power to bind the people of America by statute in all cases whatsoever. And once fighting broke out, Thomas Jefferson and John Dickinson co-authored the Declaration of Causes and Necessity of Taking Up Arms, July 6, 1775. And this was actually, a version of this is in both of their drafts. They each wrote a draft and they worked on it together and came up with a final version of it. But they both pointed out, like, what's the point of listing all the problems, all the things that they've done wrong? And they said it this way, but why should we enumerate our injuries in detail? Why? Because by one statute, they said, it is declared that Parliament can of right make laws to bind us in all cases whatsoever. Thomas Jefferson and John Dickinson then go on and say, what is to defend us against so enormous, so unlimited a power? And of course, we know that the same phrase ended up in the Declaration of Independence for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. Over at Revolutionary War and Beyond, which is a really interesting site with a lot of great resources that I look to all the time, they sum it up like this. Of all the acts of Parliament that angered the American colonists and led to the Revolutionary War, the Declaratory Act is probably the least well known, but maybe one of the most important. It stated Parliament's clear intent and belief system regarding the colonies. The colonists were subjects of the crown who could be ruled over at Parliament's pleasure, having no say in their own internal affairs. I think there's much to be learned here. If we thought that was just about taxation and we want to apply their principles today, then it's just about, oh, we have to, control the amount of taxation, when it was really about centralized and unlimited power. We hear the same type of thing from supporters of the monster state today. We are, again, living under the largest government in the history of the world, just like they were at the time. And today, people who support that monster state tell us that federal acts are supreme basically in all cases whatsoever. They're telling us all federal laws are supreme unless the federal government, a branch of the federal government itself, tells us that that federal act is in a violation of the Constitution for the United States, the Constitution that we, the people of the several states, gave legal force to. They're telling us the limits of their own power. I think there are a lot of parallels with that today. How we proceed going forward, I think it's a step-by-step plan that I've covered in many, many other episodes. Of course, 10thamendmentcenter.com/report will give you a ton of resources and strategy to move forward in a positive way. Well, I hope you guys found this interesting. I hope it was insightful. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed the episode. I really appreciate you spending some time with me today. If you support the show, you like this information, please consider doing a few free and easy things to help us spread the word. The algorithms of the mainstream platforms are always very easily triggered. So leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, smashing a like on Facebook or YouTube, leaving a comment on any of these platforms, or sharing a link, that all tells the algorithm to show the program to more people. And I can't thank you enough, because we've been reaching more and more people every single month. Thank you. And of course, if you want to put your financial faith behind our work, it's just $2 a month and up over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Don't feel any obligation, but if you are able to consider it, I would be extremely grateful for your financial support. I really appreciate you spending some time with me here today. I hope you have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week here on the Path to Liberty.